Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we discuss the top wide receiver matchups for Week 6, folks. We are almost a third of the way through fantasy football season, folks. It is absolutely wild. Today, we're going to be breaking down some of the top out wide and slot matchups using our slot first wide points per game analysis over on Razzball.com. If you don't know what we're talking about, go to Razzball.com. We actually broke out fantasy points allowed by defense in the slot and out wide. It is a fantastic tool. And today we're going to talk about the top matchups, some downgrades, all that and more on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast starting right now. And to help us decipher through all of the slot first wide analysis, it's the one and only Ben Wasley. Hey, all right, some spirit fingers to start off the show. I love that for us. This is good. Go follow this man at Fantasy First Down No on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
Well, you know what? It's been a hard week. I've got James Conner in like half of my leagues. I think I have 14 shares of James Conner. I really like James Conner. And of course, he went down. I also have a lot of Justin Jefferson in a lot of dynasty leagues. That's really hurt me. So I'm getting smashed by injuries at the moment. So I'm really looking forward to seeing which of my bench scrubs I'm going to be starting this week.
Oh, so did you go Ingram or did you go after whatever his last name is?
Demicado? No, I didn't. I didn't go for either. I just think it's going to be a committee. I'm avoiding both of them. I have a little bit of Ingram in really deep leagues, but I'm mostly just avoiding both.
They have one of the most brutal stretches for running backs over the next month. And by the time that stretch is over, guess who will be back? James Conner. So, yeah, let's hope so. But yeah, I didn't get aggressive. I actually got Ingram in a couple leagues very cheap because everybody went out after the other guy. So I was just like, all right, threw like a couple fab dollars on Ingram, got him. We'll see how it shakes out. Not starting him, though, this week. No, thank you. But that's enough running back talk. What are we doing here, folks? All right, today's about the top wide matchups for Week 6. We talk about wide receivers on today's show using our slot first wide tool. And by the way, if you're listening on the audio side, jump over to YouTube. Check us out on the YouTube channel at Razzball Fantasy. If you're watching and you want to go on a run and you can't watch the video, we also have an audio side. The great part is we do it all, folks. And make sure you jump over to TikTok and IG. We have great content over there as well. On every single show, Ben, the biggest matchups, the best ones, are the out wide matchups. You're getting the most points. You're getting the best receivers. So we make sure we highlight the top 5 out wide matchups every week. We had a lot of success over the last few weeks doing this. So let's get into some of these guys today. A lot of them are fun ones this week. Not a lot of studs per se. Some really fun, maybe notable streamer options, wide receiver 3s. And let's break it down. First off, Michael Gallup and Brandon Cooks going up against the Chargers. That's number 1. Number 2 is London and Hollins on the outside against the Washington Commanders. Number 3 is Garrett Wilson and Alan Lazard versus the Philadelphia Eagles, and there's more to come on that with a big injury in that game. We have Ridley and would have been and Zay Jones, but Jones has been ruled out. I think that's a slight bump for Christian Kirk. We'll talk about that in a minute against the Colts. And then finally, Michael Pittman and Pierce going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in the Gardner Minshew revenge game. And if you can't get hyped up for a Gardner Minshew revenge game, you don't have a pulse, folks. You don't even have a pulse. I don't even know what I'm doing ever, but I know what I'm doing when I watch that game, folks. I'm amped. Let's go. Can't wait for that one. I sprinkled the Gardner Minshew in some DFS lineups this week just for some fun. Honestly, whatever. It's going to be fun. He's like $5,000 on DK. All right. Crazy. Not bad. He get you 15 points. There you go. You just got your money's worth. Anyway, enough DFS. Let's get into the first one. It is Michael Gallup and Brandon Cooks going up against the Chargers defense that allows the most fantasy points out wide this season. Quick thoughts about these guys going into Week 6, Ben. Are you trying to stream them? Wide receiver 3. Quick thoughts about this one.
Short answer, no, not really. I did give CeeDee Lamb a bit of a bump up. Ultimately, CeeDee Lamb's still playing 2/3 of his snaps out wide, so I think this benefits him as well. Plus, I think the Chargers thing's a little bit skewed because of what Miami did to them. But realistically, Lamb's the one I'm really moving up a lot. He's an interesting DFS play if you want one of those like high upside, very high risk guys. But Gallup and Cooks, they're wide receiver 5s for me, I think. even in this matchup. It's just hard to know who's going to get the target. It's possibly Gallup, but it should be Cooks. So it's a bit of a confusing one. I'm just generally avoiding both of them most of the time.
So I want to preface one thing. CeeDee Lamb does play 70% of his snaps in the slot. So I do want to say that when you're looking at the numbers, but because he's targeted so much, that he actually gets more targets out wide than you'll see from guys like Brandon Cook. So I do want to preface that, yes, CeeDee Lamb is a primary slot. He runs most of his routes in the slot, but because of the fact that he's so volume, he gets so much of the volume that even at 30% of his snaps inside, on the outside, he's still getting more targets out wide than Brandon Cooks. I just want to preface that. We get what you're saying.
That's a better way of saying what I was trying to say. Yeah.
I get it. I get what you're saying. I totally understand. That's why we also break down the fantasy points scored by wide receiver, so you can actually see that data right on Razzball. It is a great resource. I'm all in on Gallup, and here's why. So what I've done over the last few weeks, I kind of wanted to look at teams, how they're getting beat, just not out wide and slot. I want to look at yards after the catch versus air yards. There's certain defenses that scheme. They allow big plays, and some defenses say you have to beat us on the dink and dunk. Well, the first thing I noticed with the Chargers is you could do it either way, which is fantastic. So they're 10th in air yards allowed and yards after the catch. So that's fantastic. Gallup, meanwhile, is 13th in the NFL in yards after catch per reception, which I thought was surprising. Thought of him as more of a vertical threat, but really he's actually, I guess maybe he's getting good, yards after the catch on maybe more further down the field. But for whatever's worth, that's why I like about this matchup. The other thing is he lines up on the left side of the formation, very similar to what you saw from Devontae Adams, who had 8 for 75 against this team. So I do think that I think Gallup's going to give you wide receiver 3 numbers. The Chargers, meanwhile, run 73% of their snaps in zone, and he's much better in zone, Gallup, in his numbers according to PFF. So that's why I like him as a wide receiver 3/flex this week. Cooks, I don't know what to think about his role. I'm not going to play. I'm not going to get cute with Cooks. Gallup's the guy I'm going to go with here this week. And of course, Lamb, don't overthink the slot versus wide. Lamb is still the guy. He's still the one you want, but I think Gallup could get you wide receiver 3 numbers this week. Let's jump down to the next one. So it's another one, London and Hollins. Obviously, Hollins we put on here just because we're crazy people. But we do want to highlight the fact that Hollins does run the most routes out wide with London. So that's why he's on here. But we're not advocating a Hollins start. Maybe Ben is. I haven't talked to him about it yet. But the Washington Commanders have getting smoked out wide over the last few weeks. They allow the second most fantasy points out wide this season. Notable performances are probably the studs. Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, DJ Moore. So all those guys had absolutely monster games. Is London next? Tell us, Ben, what's your thoughts?
I think London's a really interesting one. He's had a pretty tough start to the season for an outside wide receiver. I think this is his first really juicy matchup where you think, this is where he should be able to feast. But he looked pretty good last week. He was, 6 receptions, 9 targets for 78 yards. Didn't even score a touchdown, and he's still a top 20 wide receiver. So there's clearly some upside there. And we've seen wide receivers destroy the Commanders. They seem to be really weak there with Forbes and co. So he's someone that I'm interested in starting. He's like a wide receiver 3 star, but I think there's a lot of upside there. It's just there's a lot of good options this week, so it's harder to move him a little bit higher. If you've got him, though, and you're looking for a little bit of upside, he's someone I think could be a little bit interesting. Hollins, funnily enough, I'm starting in 3 leagues because I'm in a lot of 32-man leagues, and I have a lot of Hollins. The problem is Hollins is starting to lose that outside role to Kadarrell Hodge. So if you're playing in really deep leagues and you've been relying on Hollins, maybe now's the time to stop.
Yeah, Van Jefferson was recently traded there. That's a whole other egg in the basket there. I will say this. You weren't kidding. So the Atlanta's out wide schedule was below average to start the year. They were 18th, 19th in fantasy in the opponents they faced. This week, my God, it is it's an insane increase. So right there, you got to love that for London, especially because he's shown flashes over the last few weeks. The Commanders are another one of those defenses that you could do both against. Air yards, yards after the catch, not worried about that at all. London, though, is kind of neither. He's 59th in ADOT, and he's 83rd in yards after the catch per reception. That's not really that good among qualified. It's 103 qualified receivers. That's not that great. But his lineup percentages mirror DJ Moore, mostly plays on that left side. DJ Moore just went absolutely bananas. This defense is kind of slightly leans a little more man. They're 34% man coverage, and the league average is about 30. And London is better against man. So I do like all those factors. When you swirl them all together and put them in a nice little stew, I would eat some of that stew for a wide receiver 3. And I don't mind London this week. I actually have him in a couple DFS lineups because he is pretty affordable too. So I do like London there as well. Let's jump down to number 3. And this one burnt us last week because it's the Jets, and we have to admit that. And I think some of it had to do with Patrick Surtain decided, all right, DJ Moore embarrassed me. I need to make sure Garrett Wilson doesn't go off. And he made some really nice plays against Garrett Wilson, and the Jets outside receivers didn't do much. Well, they have a second chance. Okay, they have a second chance to win our hearts, Ben. And we have Wilson and Lazard against the Eagles at number 3. Now, we had big news. Darius Slay, their top outside cornerback, will be out this week. That only adds more, juice to the matchup. But notable guys who went off against this team: Puka Nacua, Terry McLaurin, Mike Evans, and Justin Jefferson. What's your thoughts here, Ben, about this out wide matchup for the Jets receivers?
I think this is one of those situations where the team's good, but they've got so many injuries out wide that it makes them look really weak. I expect they're probably going to have to move James Bradbury out wide, which is actually going to open things up in the slot a little bit, and it's probably going to help Garrett Wilson, who's been playing in the slot quite a bit recently. They've got Mario Goodrick in there. He's very, very, very weak. He's only attempted 8 tackles and he's missed 3 of them, which is not a good sign. And he's given up a reception on all 11 of the targets towards him. So very weak in the slot, but they still got James Jobe they're forced to use. They tried to drop him down and bring Goodrick in, but now they're forced to use him with Slay out. So they've got 2 really weak options. The question is, can they somehow get Bradbury to shadow Wilson wherever he goes, into the slot or out of the slot? I guess they could, but I think they probably won't, and that gives Wilson some opportunities. It'll also really open up things for Lazard. So Lazard's an interesting DFS play. I don't think I want to start him in head-to-head unless you're really desperate or if you're in a really deep league. But Wilson's someone, he's probably a wide receiver 3 for me. But he's got some upside. This is the kind of situation where against Denver, Denver's improving. The Eagles are not improving. They're still looking exactly the same, and they've got more injuries. So Wilson may be able to get right and get back in our good books this week.
So I think the first thing we have to address is why it didn't work out last week and what is really different. You brought up a good point. Denver, we just got a glimpse of what they did to the Chiefs. And it's like, okay, maybe they are figuring things out with Vance Joseph. So that's maybe the argument. So what I wanted to look at, though, is like maybe they're an air yards versus yards of the catch defense. Maybe they play more zone versus man. Maybe that's what the differences are. And so they're very similar in yards after the catch and air yards. So that's not going to be a difference maker for Wilson. So it's not like, the Broncos allow a bunch of yak, but they shut you down vertically, and then it's flipped for this matchup. It's not the case. But the one thing that is actually interesting is that, well, it doesn't matter as much. Well, Darius Slay lines up 76% of the time on one side of the field and would have been away from Garrett Wilson, while Patrick Surtain rotates each side evenly. So the Broncos used Surtain as a top matchup corner. Meanwhile, the Eagles haven't done that. So that would have been the huge difference between what Wilson would have seen this week versus last week. However, Darius Slay's out. So I'm not stressed about Bradbury. Like Wilson, it's all about Zach Wilson. Like, what was the mirage 2 weeks ago? Was it actually a thing? Can he actually do something here? Because the Eagles are going to put up points. This isn't going to be like just some friendly game. The Eagles are like, all right, well, let's go 13-7 and see how things go. No, the Eagles are going to drop 24 plus on them. So I'm interested to see how this goes. But I have to be, if you have Wilson, like knowing this information, when are you going to be confident to start the guy? If you can't, trade him. Package him with another player and go get somebody else, because if you can't start him without Darius Slay against a team that allows the 3rd most fantasy points out wide, when are you ever going to start the guy? Honestly, set him free then. Set him like a little birdie. Just set him free and let him fly away. All right, let's go to the next one. Relatively quick, we got the Jacksonville Jaguars going against the Colts this week. And so Jones is out. Calvin Ridley's basically your only man in show. I do think this actually does help Christian Kirk, who does play a little more out wide when Jones is out. So that should help his matchup. Notable performances. And the thing is, this is a repeat from week 1. We saw Ridley already play the Colts. 8 for 101 and 1. Jones went 5 for 55 and 1. So these guys really blew up anyway. So what's your thoughts? Do you think it's going to be a repeat this week, or do you think the Colts will figure it out?
I think it's going to be a repeat for Ridley. I think this is a fantastic matchup for Ridley. We realistically know the Colts are good in only one way with their cornerbacks, and that's Kenny Moore. He's very good, but he's mainly playing in the slot, which means he's able to shut down the slot receiver, which he could do with Christian Kirk in week 1. Now with Zay Jones out, is Christian Kirk moving out wide a lot more? Well, possibly. Especially if they're going to use Jamal Agnew. Do they use Tim Jones? What do they do with those guys? I suspect they probably mix it up a little bit. I suspect Christian Kirk's probably, 50-50 out wide and in the slot. Anytime he's in the slot, he's going to really struggle. Moore's very good, but when he's out wide, he's still going to score some points. So that makes him kind of a low-end wide receiver too for me. On the other hand, Calvin Ridley's like a top 10 option. I think he's someone you absolutely have to start regardless of the situation. The Colts cornerbacks are just really weak. They're already missing Dallas Flowers. They're going out with the rookie Juju Branson, Darrell Baker probably. Both of those guys are pretty weak. So he's someone I definitely want to be playing and possibly targeting in DFS as well.
I think it is obvious. Ridley, we're not stressed about. I think you get Ridley in your DFS lineup. The Kirk thing is where I get kind of, I don't know. So the Colts are, when we talked about this a little bit earlier, Colts are an air yards defense. They allow a lot of vertical passing, like we just saw with Hopkins a few weeks ago. That's how you beat them. That favors Calvin Ridley. That's why Ridley for me is a DFS play this week. I love it. I'm all in. Now for Kirk, we did start seeing a little bit of an adjustment. The 1 week when he played with Jones, because Jones played week 1, got hurt in week 2, missed 2 games, and played half the game in week 5. So really it's been one real full game. He played 77% of the snaps in the slot, and that was against the Colts. And like you brought up, tough matchup. The 2 games where Zay Jones did not play at all, he played 62%. So it dropped by 15%, which should open things up for him. I don't know if I'm confident in him as a wide receiver 2, but I do think he's a great wide receiver 3. I think that if you want like 10 to 12 PPR points, I think you're going to get that from him easy. I just think that there's Evan Ingram, and then Jamal Agnew too is an interesting one because Agnew missed time. And when Agnew plays, he's a slot guy. So maybe Kirk moves out wide even more. So I don't want to fade Kirk. So I think I'm in on him as a wide receiver 3, but I'm just going to say I'm all in on Ridley. Wide receiver.
You're really on the fence. Are you getting splinters? Because that fence right up there.
I'm just kind of like, all right, let's go then. I'm in. Let's do it. Forget it.
Let's go. Let's
do it, baby. All right, number 5. Let's join the party here and talk a little bit about Gardner Minshew's revenge game. Obviously, Anthony Richardson said, hey, man, I'm going to sit this one out because I want my boy to go light up the Jags this week. And, of course, we got Pittman and Pierce. Pierce has kind of been an afterthought. Josh Downs has become more of the wide receiver, too. But Pittman has been better than I think I personally thought he would be with a rookie quarterback. Minshew, he's been very good. The Jacksonville Jaguars out wide allow the 5th most fantasy points. And Pittman in week 1 went 8 for 97 and 1. So what's your thoughts about this matchup?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. You know, with Gardner Minshew there, he does hone in on the slot a little bit. He loves Josh Downs. Every time he's played, he's gone to Josh Downs a lot. But this is not a game to be targeting Josh Downs. Jacksonville is really good in the slot. Trey Herndon's a good slot cornerback. So I think it's that sort of situation where you've got to believe that Pittman's going to go big again. He was fantastic in week 1, nearly 100 yards and a touchdown. You'd imagine that Jacksonville might have something a little bit different going into this week, knowing that that's happened previously, but he's still a guy that I have to start. He's a wide receiver 2 for me. Josh Downs is where it gets really interesting. Most weeks, I think he's someone who becomes quite interesting, especially while Minshew's playing, but I'm not starting him this week because of that slot issue. This is an out-wide matchup. I want Pittman. Pierce is someone I don't think I'll ever target Pierce. I don't even see a point in rostering him outside deep dynasty leagues. For me, he's someone that you just don't need at all.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment too. So when I was looking at this, I think you just kind of roll it through again. I think this matchup, we kind of saw it previously. Both these teams are much better against the run than the pass. And I think that you're going to see Trevor Lawrence and Gardner Minshew be able to move the football in through the air. And I think Pittman, his 8 for 97 in one line. It's not like the Jags defense has gotten better. We've seen guys like Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs play very well. The one thing I did find very interesting that might make Pittman a little more risky this week. The average depth of target with Gardner Minshew with Michael Pittman is 5.4. So over that span, out of 72 qualified receivers that got at least like 8 targets over that span, he was 70th of 72 in ADOT. That's concerning for me because, like, you're asking for him to do a lot of work after the catch. And so the good news is that they're playing a Jags team that allows the third most yak after the reception. So I would say typically that's just something to monitor. Maybe in certain matchups we watch that to see if maybe they'll get more air yards for Pittman. But this week it shouldn't matter because the Jags are very vulnerable after the catch. So I'm still in on Pittman as a wide receiver too. I want to get him in my lineups this week. All right, let's jump down to some notable slot matchups. Let's get into these real quick. We're going to cover 2 on today's show. Chris Godwin versus the Bengals, and then also Curtis Samuel versus the Falcons. So there wasn't many like notable slot guys this week that I thought we should bring up. Tyler Boyd's got Seattle, but Tyler Boyd just seems like once T. Higgins comes back, he falls off. But Tyler Boyd technically has a fantastic matchup against Seattle. Number 1 most fantasy points allowed in the slot. So I do want to throw a shout out to him. But I want to talk about Godwin because through my research, I found that Chris Godwin is no longer the slot receiver, which is freaking crazy. So early on in the season, weeks 1 and 2, he was playing about 40 to 45% of his snaps in the slot. Well, over the last 2 weeks, he's actually bumped out wide. He actually only played 13% of his snaps out in the slot in week 4. Now, some of that has to do with Mike Evans being hurt, but the week prior, it was all the way down to 30%. So this is a huge development. So Chris Godwin will be playing out wide against the Bengals, which means his matchup goes from elite to really bad because the Bengals are very good against perimeter receivers. What's your thoughts about Godwin's kind of new role heading into week 6?
It's really hard to know how to deal with this. There's a lot of different factors, and you highlighted a lot of them really well. Firstly, is he playing in the slot this week? Have they just been putting him out wide to target matchups, or do they see him as more of an out wide receiver now and they're trying to use their young guys in the slot a little bit more? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that except for the Bucs staff. The reality is that if they play him in the slot, this is a fantastic opportunity for him. If they play him out wide and Mike Evans is healthy, this is not a great opportunity. This is somewhere where he can really have a big bust game. He has been getting most of his points out wide, but I think that's mostly because of how they've been choosing to use him and because of the matchups. I have to feel like they're smart enough to know that they can target the Bengals through the slot this game, and that they have to give him a lot of targets using that, especially because they can't be relying on Mike Evans with a hamstring injury. That's the kind of thing where re-injury can happen at any time. So I'm playing Godwin, but he's a scary wide receiver too for me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, you brought up perfectly, those rookie receivers. You have, Devin Tompkins and also Trey Palmer. They're not the biggest guys. So they might just say to themselves, let's get them in the slot, get them, more comfortable in there, get them off press. And that's why they have Godwin out wide. We saw that similar things happen to Adam Thielen in Minnesota. He was early on in his career. He was more of a slot guy. Then they moved him out wide, which I don't know if is great for his fantasy value. So I'm interested. This is something to watch. I am actually not going to start Godwin this week if I can avoid him, but I'm curious to see what the numbers look like next week because of this turn of events. All right, let's jump down to the next one. It is Curtis Samuel going up against the Falcons. Now, we've noted this matchup a bunch. The Falcons allow the 7th most fantasy points in the slot, but they are dominant out wide, which we'll touch on in just a second because McLaurin and Dotson have one of the worst matchups this week, but notable, you brought this up last week too. They faced some really good slot guys, Christian Kirk, Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I do want to point out, Robert Woods didn't work out last week, but he had 9 targets. 9 targets. He went 3 for 30 on 9 targets. So just a fun nugget. Curtis Samuel this season is averaging a 30% higher catch rate than Robert Woods. So if you just give him 9 targets, he's guaranteed to get 2 to 3 more receptions. So thoughts on Curtis Samuel? Are you thinking about him in PPR leagues this week?
Yeah, he's someone who really interests me this week. I picked him up a couple of weeks ago in quite a few leagues just because they seem to be using him a little bit more than Jahan Dotson. It just seems to be the way that Sam Howell's operating. But that's starting to slide a little bit more towards Logan Thomas. I think this is a massive Logan Thomas game. The Falcons love letting the tight ends get involved. They're a little bit weak in their linebackers, especially coverage-wise. And we've seen they've considered the second most tight end points of all teams this season, but they're very frugal against running backs. They're very frugal against wide receivers. So Logan Thomas is, for me, not quite a must-start, but he's definitely a tight end one this week. Curtis Samuel, I find him interesting. I've got him coincidentally, right behind Tyler Boyd, who I actually quite like this week, even though T. Higgins is probably coming back. I think both of those guys are kind of flex options. I'm happy to play either of them if I absolutely need to, especially in PPR. I think there's upside there, but do I trust them? Absolutely not. It's entirely possible he gets 2 or 3 targets and very few yards.
So when I was looking into the Falcons defense, they allow the 5th fewest yards after the catch per reception. Why is that notable? Curtis Samuel's 93rd out of 103 wide receivers in ADOT, okay? But he's 51st in yards after the catch. So he's much more short area, get the ball in his hands, and yards after the catch. And now you're facing a defense that doesn't allow yards after the catch. That's going to be a problem. But the other thing I will say is it's a little bit tougher version of the Arizona Cardinals matchup they had earlier this season in the sense of where they allow their fantasy points, how good they are after the catch. And he went 5 for 54 there. So if you need a PPR wide receiver 3/4, I'm okay with it, but I am not going out of my way to start Curtis Samuel this week. There's a little bit of red flags, especially yards after the catch stuff that I don't like. So I'm going to call him a wide receiver 3, probably wide receiver 4. Before we jump down to our notable matchup downgrades, we do have some questions rolling in here. And this one is kind of interesting. So Chill Channel, how you doing? Always a pleasure, my good man. Bobby and Ben, it was mentioned that Ben was in a really thinned out league. So Ben, you kind of know from deeper formats, he's kind of looking for either, can you either of you provide one wide receiver or running back in a really deep league that might still be available and keep an eye on? So like, what's a deep name that not getting a lot of hype right now that's probably still on waivers that you might want to scoop up?
So in those 32-team leagues, the main guys that I've been picking up are Xavier Gibson, who's starting to get a lot more snaps in New York. He's the out-wide alternative to when they use Randall Cobb in the slot. That's how they've been able to get Garrett Wilson into the slot a lot more. They're using Gibson outside. He's someone that I'm looking at as someone I'm just picking up to see what happens. But the big one this week with Juju Smith-Schuster and Demario Douglas out, Ty Montgomery is probably the starting slot receiver in New England. So if you need someone in a really deep league, I'd go with Ty Montgomery. And he's got running back eligibility. And in some leagues, he's also got wide receiver eligibility. So he gives you a little bit of flexibility as well. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how he gets used. He got used a little bit last week. And I suspect they may use him as their starting wide receiver this week.
I'm going to go for running back Chris Brooks, Miami Dolphins running back. The Dolphins situation with Jeff Wilson coming back, but Wilson, Mostert, and a chain have proven one thing. They cannot stay healthy. You can even throw in Salvin Ahmed. He's probably a little bit more owned, but I like that. The kid, Chris Brooks, last time he played, 9 carries, 66 yards. He's another one of these faster guys that I like. The other one is actually, I'm going to go against you on this one and go Demario Douglas. I know he's hurt right now, but he started getting more slot work over the last few weeks too. I think if you need something really quick, you go Ty Montgomery. But if you're looking for a stash, Demario Douglas, I really liked what he was showing in the slot. And Juju just looks dusted, folks. It's not great. All right. Yeah, what do you guys, Patricio, break it down another one. What do you guys think about DJ Chark this week? So you have DJ Chark. The Lions have let's see. Do you know off the top of your head who they're playing? Because I can't remember right now.
They're playing
Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay has been a little bit banged up. Charlton Davis and Jamel Dean have missed time, but they both should be back this week coming off the bye. So
wait. I just named the wrong team. They're playing against Miami.
Who? Oh, DJ Chark is on the Carolina Panthers. Wow, look at us. Woo!
Yeah.
Okay.
I went to you said Detroit, and I went to Detroit, and I was like, wait a second, what are we talking about?
All right. Sorry, folks. All right. Hey, whatever. We make mistakes sometimes. Yeah. So the Carolina Panthers have Miami Dolphins. Yeah. What's your thoughts about this matchup?
I mean, look, the question is, what do I think about DJ Chark this week? Honestly, I haven't thought about DJ Chark this week. He's not even in my consideration. He's so boom bust. You can't really use him in head-to-head leagues. He's maybe like wide receiver 50-something for me this week. You'd have to be pretty desperate to start him. In DFS, maybe, because you know he can have those boom plays. But, I mean, how much do we trust Bryce Young to use him? I mean, I don't trust him at all. He's going to Thielen nearly every single time. And Mingo's getting plenty of targets. Chark's just the deep threat who they use occasionally.
Yeah, Miami. So I would say this. Miami is an out-wide funnel defense, so they have a lot of decent amount of points out wide. So there is something there. The problem for me is that, like, the targets haven't been there with Bryce Young. And so it's like a DFS tournament dart throw. Like, that's how I view DJ Chark this week. Because, yeah, Miami's going to put up a shit ton of points. And, Carolina's going to have to score late in this game. And garbage time's our friend, folks. We love garbage time. But even with everything going on, Bryce Young just hasn't really targeted DJ Chark enough to trust him in redraft. But I do think the matchup makes sense a little bit. Miami is kind of like, they allow a decent amount of air yards. They allow a decent amount of yards after the catch. So there could be something there, but I would not get cute in your redraft lineups. All right, let's do one more before we talk about our downgrades for this week. We have a 12-man non-PPR. Tua, Walker, Swift, St. Brown, Puka, TJ Hawkinson, Flex, Josh Jacobs. I have Ayuk on the bench and Moss. Should I trade Puka and Moss for Evans? So I personally would not trade Puka and Nakua for Mike Evans. What's your thoughts here?
No, I would. I mean, Moss is basically a throw in here, but Moss does have some value. If Jonathan Taylor gets injured, and we know he's a running back, so that's possible, Moss becomes someone who's interesting. So he's probably one of the more high upside handcuffs around. Plus, he's going to have some week-to-week value in certain matchups until JT gets up to speed. So I wouldn't want to add Moss to that, but I wouldn't want to trade Puka for Evans either way either. We know that Puka's still a top 12 option nearly, even when Cup's around. It's just such a high-volume offense. So, no.
Yeah, Joe, I like the question. No, it's a good thought. I would look after the Jonathan Taylor owner, seek him out, and see what's on his bench and say, hey, if there's something like juicy on his bench, like, hey, I'll give you Zach Moss so you could have that Colts backfield. You could get off that train and you could find something else. I've been trying to find a good trade for Zach Moss, and I have not found anything yet. All right, let's jump down to our downgrades for this week before we close the show. And the first one is McLaurin and Dotson versus the Falcons. So it's been well talked about here. AJ Terrell and company have just been really good against outside receivers. They have allowed the third fewest fantasy points out wide, and we just saw what they did to Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Both held under 10 PPR points. What's your thoughts here, Ben? Are you fading McLaurin and Dotson this week?
Yes, is the really simple answer. McLaurin in certain leagues I might start, given he's probably a very, very low wide receiver 3 for me, but I'm scared of using him, and ideally I'd prefer not to if I've got the chance. If you're looking for a really safe floor, realistically he's going to get some targets because he is their wide receiver 1, but he lacks the really big upside of a lot of the other guys in that area, and especially in PPR, I'd avoid him. Jahan Dotson, I just don't think I can start him until I actually see him perform a little bit, and this is not the matchup to be risking it.
Yeah. Okay, so here's some notable stats. I just brought up Nico and Dell. Ridley, 11 points. Dobbs, 5 points. Josh Reynolds, by the way, who everyone's going to think Josh Reynolds sucks. He had 0 points against the Falcons. He's had over 66 receiving yards in every other game this season, and they held him to 0. No. Out? No, thank you. All right, Brown and Wilson versus the Rams. So this one is the Arizona Cardinals last week. Marquise Brown scoring the touchdown just makes me laugh because, like, I was fading Brown hard last week, and he had like 4 catches for 40 yards, but he scored a touchdown, and I'm like, every time I fade a guy aggressively, he scores a touchdown. Now, if he doesn't catch the touchdown, I look smart. I'm like, oh, okay, he had a lower score, whatever. Nope, scores a touchdown. But this week he gets the Rams. So the Rams have allowed the second fewest fantasy points out wide this season. What's your thoughts about this matchup? Are you actually fading one of these guys this week?
I mean, there's a lot to worry about here. Marquise Brown's had an illness of some sort all week. We don't know what that means these days. So we don't know whether he's 100%. We don't know whether he's going to be on some sort of snap count just because he doesn't have the fitness in him. That's a little bit scary. The matchup's bad. But they also don't have James Conner anymore, which increases his touchdown upside, his target upside. So it can go a little bit both ways. For me, he's a very low wide receiver too. But if you've got another option that you feel good about, then I would prefer to use them over him. Michael Wilson, this is just not the week to be gambling on him for me. So
the guys that have beat the Rams have been A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf, bigger physical receivers. That's not Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown, body type-wise and skill set mirrors more Lockett and Devonta Smith, who both have been completely shut down. So if you look at like the air yards roll versus yards after the catch, Marquise Brown's like the similar ADOT, but he has a little better yards after the catch than those guys, but he's nowhere close to like A.J. Brown. His lineup percentage, though, does mirror A.J. Brown a little bit. So I'm kind of going back and forth. Rams play a lot more zone than most teams, and Brown has been better against man, according to PFF. So when I look at all the data, I'm like, he's earned the right to be a starter on your team, but I think he's a wide receiver 3 flex only. If you have 2 options, 2 wide receivers on your team like him, I'm going to go to the other guys in this matchup. That makes sense. All right, jump down to the next one. And that's not a typo, folks. It's Brown and Smith again. It's Brown, this time against the Jets. Now, the Jets, of course, we all know about Sauce Gardner. They should get DJ Reed back this week. They have allowed the 5th most fantasy points out wide this 5th fewest fantasy points out wide this season. The only notable performance so far has been Stephon Diggs. What's your thoughts here, Ben? Are you starting or fading these wide receivers?
I think A.J. Brown, you just have to start these days. He's really starting to show that in most matchups, he's just going to perform in some way regardless. Now, is he going to have a big week? Is he going to have an okay week? Are they going to give him targets and he's not able to do anything with them? Well, we don't know, is the reality. But the upside's big enough that I have to start A.J. Brown. Devonta Smith, on the other hand, I'm happy to bench this week. He's a high wide receiver 3 for me this week. This is a pretty scary matchup, and he's just not getting the targets to really make him reliable. Both of these guys are scary as well because they are starting to use the running game a little bit more effectively this year, and they don't need to rely on their wide receivers. Plus, they've got to get Dallas Goedert in there. There's just so many mouths to feed, and this doesn't feel like a game where it's really going to necessarily be a blow-up game, and that limits their upside. So Smith is a possible sit depending on what your other options are. A.J. Brown, I just still think you have to start him.
A.J. Brown's a must start for me. Not worried about him at all. He kind of mirrors him and Stephon Diggs have kind of like we've talked about this previously. They've had some overlap before. A.J. Brown's just earned the right, but here's the reason statistically why. So the Jets are as good as they are. They are a yards after the catch defense, meaning they allow a lot of yak. They're 8th highest yards after the catch per reception in the NFL. That's A.J. Brown all day. A.J. Brown is 14th in the NFL in yards after the catch. Smith is 70th in that metric. So right there alone, it lines up. Now, Smith and A.J. Brown are moved all over the formation. So they kind of are. So the lineup percentage-wise, neither of them kind of mirrors. They both kind of like Diggs. So I'm not concerned about that. It's a man defense, so that's good news for both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith because the Jets do play a lot of man. But overall, we've seen this story before. It's A.J. Brown's offense now. He's getting the dominant looks, and so I'm going to play him no matter what. I just don't think there's going to be enough for another receiver to give you top 24 numbers. That's why I have Smith, once again, kind of similar with Marquise Brown. I have him more as a wide receiver 3 flex play only this week. He is not a must start in this matchup. All right.
Honestly, free Devonta Smith, really. He's really good. Get him to a team where he can be the wide receiver 1. It's frustrating that he's not getting used the way he deserves to be. He's a massive talent, and he's behind just a better talent, basically.
So, okay. Because you brought this up, I have to say something from last year. One of the craziest stats. So when I was going through all my stat digging and trying to figure out, all right, where I'm going to rank these guys, one of the craziest stats that I found was that if you isolate the games where Devonta Smith in 2022 played with Jalen Hurts and Dallas Goedert, he would have been the wide receiver 32 in fantasy that year. Because if you look at the games that he played with Gardner Minshew, he went off. He went off with Gardner Minshew. 25 PPR points with Gardner Minshew in both games. So if you take those games out and you remove the games with Goddard, he became a mid-range wide receiver 3. And I didn't know what to do with that information because everybody had him as a top 12 to 15 receiver. And I'm so I hedged and I put him right around 20 because I was I think he's better than that. But I'm there's clearly something going on here. So I'm glad I hedged a little bit because I got no Smith. But there is something to it. I think you're right. It would be great for him to get a chance to be the 1, but the Eagles are going to probably win the NFC title game is going to be a lot of fun to watch this year. That's all I know. All right. Yeah. Let's see if we got any questions here. All right. Here's a good one here. SMN. What's going on? Fresh name to the channel. We appreciate you jumping on. Sell a chain in London for Ford and Metcalf. I'm 0-5. So honestly, you're 0-5. Go for it. A chain is not going to do anything for you for the next month. Ford at least will give you some maybe RB2 weeks. And then I think Metcalf, of course, we know is an upgrade over London. So this is the type of 0-5 trade that in a vacuum, yes, we would prefer to have a chain probably because he's awesome. But you're 0-5. You can't wait a month. And now it's sounding like 6, maybe even 8 weeks for a chain. We don't even know. You need to win games now. I say 100% make this trade. What's your thoughts, Ben?
100%. I actually really like Jerome Ford. He's had some bad matchups, but he's getting undervalued at the moment. He's someone I'm trading for. So Jerome Ford, yes. Metcalf, massive upgrade over London.
All right. Let's see. We got Richard. Cannot make any roster moves, trades, or subs until I put JT out of IR, but I can only keep 3 RBs max. Okay, that's notable. Let's see. Chill Channel. By the way, Joe Rudy Gamble off Raswell has Jacobs ranked as his number 1 running back this week. Interesting. Make sure you start him in your lineup. Josh Jacobs, number 1 running back this week. I love that. Rudy Gamble, by the way. Shout out to Rudy, our projections expert, who's 11th right now in the season-long accuracy rankings on Fantasy Pros. So I'm proud of him. Keep it up, Rudy. You're making us all look good. All right, folks. All right, before we close the show, Ben, you know what to do. This is what we do. Weekly streamers and stashes. We want to give you the floor. Tell the people, first off, where they can find all your content, and then tell the people some streamers and stashes for week 6.
Well, firstly, obviously, rasball.com is where you go and see all my articles. That's the best place to be. But you can also go to our website at ffdfantasyfootball.com. Got all my rankings up there. Got any other podcasts and articles we got going on. But, of course, Rasball's the place to be. My favorite streamers this week, James Cook is someone that I really like. I feel like we saw him last week and he had a bit of a dud game, but we know that in close games or when the Bills are behind, they're going to struggle. James Cook is a good option this week. I think you should be starting him. Don DeForman's also an interesting one that I wasn't able to put in there, but now that all the Chicago guys are out, he's someone you can start if you're really desperate for a running back streamer. And Tutu Atwell, people seem to think that Tutu Atwell's going to completely disappear from this offense. I don't agree. I think he's a good deep option. And my favorite this week, and your favorite every week, Bobby, Logan Thomas. Start Logan Thomas in every single league unless you have someone like Travis Kelce. I
have him in every league. I have him in every league, so I'm excited for that call. By the way, Tutu Atwell, and one of my pet projects I would love to do one day is missed opportunities. Tutu Atwell had a slant route last week, and he just missed it. He catches that ball, that entire stat line goes from like 3 catches for 9 yards and a touchdown to 4 catches for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns, and we're not having any Atwell conversations this week in a great matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. All right, that's all we got for today, folks. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on today's show. It's the Rasball Fantasy Football Podcast on the Rasball Fantasy YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe, follow us across the board. Join us on Twitter at Rasball. We also have Rasball NFL. Go follow Ben Wasley at Fantasy First Down to O, myself at Bobby LaMarco. And of course, jump on the IG and TikTok. And if you ever just need to listen to a show, we also have it on all the audio podcasts. Thank you for joining once again, folks. We are out of here.